I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at 10.4, the Reformation spreads. All right, some of the key objectives we'll be taking a look at here in 10.4. We'll be looking at how the innovative ideas in different Protestant sects or different types of Protestant churches embrace some of the new ideas. We'll understand why England went on to form a new church. We'll analyze how the Catholic Church reformed itself. We'll explain why many groups faced persecution during the Reformation. We'll explain the impact of the Reformation. Okay, again, as we go through, I'll read each question. For each question, you should make a determination yourself as to how you might respond. And then once I go through it, you'll have a better indication then as to whether or not you understand each concept. So question 1, how did the Protestant Reformation lead to conflict amongst ruling monarchs? Again, remember a monarch is a country that's led by, let's say, a king or a queen. Usually it's passed on from one generation to the next within the same family. So Catholic kings had fought against Protestant kings to control different parts of Europe. Catholic kings tried to reform the church to slow down the Reformation. There's a lot of concern within the Catholic Church that the Protestant church could basically put them out of business if all Christians began to embrace Protestantism over Catholicism. Then perhaps the entire church could die out. Rulers had to deal with the different sects or religious groups that emerged within the Protestant church. Each of these different sects had slightly different views of how the church should run. Okay, question number 2. Why do Protestants develop many different sects rather than just embracing, for example, Lutheranism? Protestantism was a brand new form of Christianity, so different regions of Europe tweaked their sect to fit their own preferences and little different aspects that they kind of preferred over other groups during that period of time. Okay, question number 3. When did King Henry VIII rule England? You can see King Henry VIII pictured here. He's one of the more famous kings in history of England. He was king during the early 1500s. And we kind of alluded to number 4. So if you look at number 4, you should be able to figure out that a king usually becomes king if they're the eldest son. So the firstborn son usually inherits the crown upon the death of the father, who was the previous king. And this is how monarchies traditionally throughout history have passed along the leadership in a country. Okay, question 5. Why did King Henry VIII have a conflict with the Pope and the Catholic Church? Usually the King of England had a working or cooperative relationship with the Pope. Obviously the Pope, and unfortunately religion is a financial business in addition to being what should be a good outlet for humans to kind of come together towards a collective goal. King Henry VIII was having an issue with having a male heir. The king and his first queen, the Queen Catherine of Aragon, had only one child. And the daughter was Mary Tudor. And Tudor's the dynasty that ruled England for a long period of time. King Henry, obviously, it's Henry Tudor. Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife and remarry to have a son, but the Pope refused to annul his marriage. Obviously, a divorce is a violation in a Catholic church and something that he preferred to have an annulment, which would have basically null and voided his first marriage, which would allow for him to get a fresh start with a new queen. And the Pope did not want to create an exception for King Henry VIII, even though he's a powerful leader. And usually popes would do a favor like that for the king, but in this case here, the Pope refused. This led to the Act of Supremacy, which takes us into question number 6. How did the Act of Supremacy help King Henry VIII eventually achieve his goal of getting a new wife? So just because he was bitter at the Pope and upset that the Pope would not agree to his request, he decided to change the entire religion of a country, his home country of England, from Catholicism to Protestantism so he can have his marriage annulled. Parliament's new law with the Act of Supremacy made England under the new Protestant Church of England. King Henry VIII got his annulment, and he would marry 4 more times and end up with a male heir. Finally getting a son, Edward. Why was the Pope's denial of Henry VIII's request for an annulment so critical to the formation of the Church of England? Had the Pope granted the annulment, it's unlikely King Henry VIII would have formed the new Church of England. Granting annulments had been a common occurrence by previous popes for royals, but the Pope did not want to offend Catherine's nephew, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. So really he was kind of torn between 2 different leaders at that point in time, and so he went with Charles V and loyalty to Charles V over King Henry VIII. What is significant about the fact that during the dissolution, Henry granted some of these lands to nobles and other high-ranking citizens? Well, the nation became divided between loyal Catholics and those who were open to supporting the new Church of England. By granting land to high-ranking citizens, Henry was indirectly buying support for his new church. 9. What happened to outspoken Catholics who refused to support the Church of England? Here's where it's going to get really disturbing in England during this period of time. They were tortured until they converted to Protestantism. Those who refused to convert to Protestantism were executed. Over the course of time, eventually Henry would have 6 different wives. Number 10, how did King Henry VIII's death in 1547 lead to religious turmoil? Well, his 9-year-old son became king, and even at a very young age, he ascended to the throne and got leadership help from advisors. But he died at a very young age in his teens, and Henry's first daughter, then Mary Tudor, became queen and tried to bring Catholicism back using violence and terror. When Queen Mary died, her sister Elizabeth became queen, who secured England as a Protestant nation. So you kind of see it kind of flip-flop, swap, go back and forth from different forms of religion. And Queen Mary, she wanted revenge because she had felt betrayed, as basically she and her mom, Catherine, got kicked to the curb when Henry was granted the annulment by the new Church of England. Queen Mary got nicknamed Bloody Mary. Queen Mary was nicknamed Bloody Mary because she executed heretics who refused to convert back to Catholicism. So when she flip-flopped and swapped the church back to Catholicism, those who remained Protestant, many of whom were executed by Queen Mary. Her extreme actions obviously hurt the reputation of the Catholic Church and hurt support for the church. 12, how did the Elizabethan settlement impact the Reformation in England? The Elizabethan settlement emphasized religious tolerance, which provided the foundation of modern-day freedom of religion. So no longer were you forced to be Protestant. So kind of in a compromise, Queen Elizabeth, who turned out to be a very strong queen, she allowed for Catholicism still to exist. 13, what were the basic components of the Catholic Reformation? So obviously the Catholic Reformation is going to movement to, I guess, prevent additional people from leaving the Catholic Church. So they want to reform their own church to kind of, I guess, stop the exodus of many people who were turning to Protestantism for a variety of different reasons. So it was an attempt to slow down the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic Church tried to end corruption and abuses. The Inquisition, heretics, non-believers, Protestants were often tortured and killed, which is kind of a negative aspect, obviously, within society. 14, what was the Council of Trent? Anytime you see the word council, that's a meeting of an organization or a group, just like we have the Student Council. It was a meeting organized to lead the Catholic Reformation. It pushed for reforms to slow down the exodus from the church and establish new schools. And you can see some of the images there, including the large gatherings of religious leaders. 15, how did the Catholic Reformation impact Europe by the 1600s? Reforms slowed down the Protestant movement, and the majority of Europe remained Catholic but divided. With Catholics in the southern region of Europe and Protestants in the northern region of Europe. Let me just clarify that point there for you. And sometimes when I'm going through here, I see points where it might be a little bit better if I phrased it a little bit differently there for you. 16, what does the term Counter-Reformation imply about the causes of this movement? The church did not call for reforms at the Council of Trent out of the goodness of their hearts, but really to prevent the Protestant Reformation from completely destroying the Catholic Church. So the Counter-Reformation means they were countering the Reformation that led to the establishment of the Protestant Church. 17, how were many outsiders and other religions treated by Christians during the Reformation? Not very well. Outsiders are often seen as witches. We see this with the persecution of witches at the Salem witch trials in the New England region of the American colonies. Jews, they faced discrimination, pogroms, rounded up into ghettos or separated into different areas, ostracized, facing anti-Semitic behavior. 18, what is the term for prejudice against Jews? And I kind of just alluded to that, anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is unfortunately something that Jews faced for many centuries. It's not just unique to something that you're probably more familiar with, like the Holocaust. 19, why was religious persecution widespread during the Reformation? Unfortunately, toleration of other religions is not something that was accepted by many people during this period of time. Some religions continue even to this day to harbor harsh feelings towards other religious groups. Okay, the lesson reflection question. Again, I'm going to read it out and give you a moment to reflect yourself, and then I'll take you through some responses. List examples of contemporary religious extremism and problems caused by it. So think to today, and once again, we always like to try and make connections to modern day society. Nazi Germany and the Holocaust is probably the most famous one, or infamous one. The division of India into Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan after the independence movement took hold in 1947. India was then subdivided into modern-day India and Pakistan to stop the fighting between the two religious groups of Hindus and Muslims. The genocide of Christian Armenians. The Armenians were killed during the period of time in and around World War I. Conflicts with Israel, anti-American feelings. All of these are things that could kind of be similar to what we're seeing here during this period of time in history. So take a moment or two to get down anything you need to. And remember, again, you can always pause along the way if need be, or go back to get any responses you may or may not have missed. Hopefully you enjoyed our discussions here today. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is Out.